Hello guys, my name is AP, and today we're going to be doing our 6th tutorial, and today's tutorial is going to be all about shaders. Now, shaders go along with models, and basically what shaders, there's 3 types. There's Vertex, there's Fragment, and there's Geometry, but we won't be messing with Geometry right now. We're only going to be messing with Vertex and Fragment. So what Vertex does, it changes the position, or it sets the position for every single part of your model. So it goes from top left to bottom right. It does every vertex. Now what Fragment Shader is, it basically colors in the whatever you want. So if you want a white, you can set it in there. If you want it all red, you can set it in there. So we're going to create a new package, and we're going to call it shaders. And so we're going to be using shaders a lot in our engine, because instead of having to define specific models with specific textures, we can go to shaders and we can just create it there instead of having to create a texture. So we're going to create a new class. It's going to be abstract, because we're going to extend off this class, and it's going to be called shader. So now with the shader, we're going to create a private int shader vertex shader ID. We're going to have a fragment shader ID. I'm going to have program ID. So with this, we can define our vertex shader, fragment shader, and program, which runs both shaders. So we're going to create a constructor shader, and that's going to take in 2 files. That's going to take string vertex file, and it's going to take string fragment file. And we're going to create 2 more private variables. It's going to be private string up here, what we listed here. So it would be not fragment. Well, yeah, that, but this first. So we got fragment file and vertex file, and we're just going to be this dot vertex file is vertex file, and this dot fragment file is equal to fragment file. So now that we got the constructor, we're going to create 3 methods. We're going to create actually it's 4 methods, and 3 public and 1 private. So we're going to create a public void create. We're going to be doing public void bind, and we're going to do public void remove. So those are going to be our public functions, and we're going to create another one called read file, which basically takes in a string and it returns what's in that file. So anyways, so what we're going to do is we're going to do private void read file, and it's going to take in a string file. And we're going to basically do this up here instead of because reading files is a lot more complicated. So we're going to just, and plus we got to do it twice, so let's just do it down here. So we're going to do our private void read file first. So what we need is we need a buffered reader and a string builder. So let's create that. So a buffered reader, and that's going to be called reader. And we're going to call it string builder, and we're just going to call that string. Now we're going to import everything, and we have to surround this in a try catch, and it's just going to take IO exception just in case it's not a real file. So try catch IO exception, import, and we're going to do system.error.out, or not out.println, and it's going to be called error couldn't find file. So, and then we're going to, and it's giving us an error because it's just saying there's nothing that says there could be an IO exception. Now we're going to fill that in. So we're going to do try, and so while reader, or we're going to have another string called line, and we're going to say, I'm going to set line equal to reader.readLine. And if it's not equal to null, saying that there's still lines going, then we're wanting to do what we want down here. Oh yeah, this has got to be equals null. This has got to be equals new string builder. There. So while there's still lines, we're going to add that to our string. So at the end, we're gonna, if it's still there, then we're going to say string dot append, and it's going to take in line. It also wants to append a line break, so append string backwards slash and end. This basically means a line break. So with this append, it doesn't add a break at the end, so we have to add it ourselves. So then at the end of all this, we are going to return our string, and it's going to be toString. So, oh yeah, this has got to be string. So now with all this, we should be able to create a Vertex file. So with create, let's go now to create. So we have our 5 variables. This is where we're going to use them. So first, we're going to create a program, which is program ID. And that's going to be set to GL 2.0.gl create program. And it's just that you don't have to return anything, it's just program. So now we're going to create a vertex shader. So vertex shader ID is equal to GL20.gl create shader, and it takes in what type of shader it will be. So it's GL20.gl vertex shader right here. And so now we are going to set where the shader is located, and we're going to compile it. So we do GL20.gl shader source, and it wants which shader you want, so vertex shader ID, and it wants where it is. So this is where the read file function comes in handy. So we're going to do read file, and we're going to do vertex file. So what this does, it takes in where the vertex file is, and it reads it, and it returns a huge string, and then with the next one, it actually creates what we want. So GL create, not GL create, GL, what is it? My mind went blank. Hold on. GL no, shader source, uniform no, validate no, use program no. Okay, we went to, I just forgot everything. Hold on. Okay, I got it. It's called compile shader. Oh, I think it's compile. Compile shader, and it wants which shader you want to compile. So with that, there we go. And many things could be wrong with this. Like, you could have an error in the vertex shader ID. So we're going to add a if statement to detect if there's actually an error. So we're going to do GL20.gl get shader I, which basically is the shader information. It wants which shader you want to and what do you want to get. So we're going to do GL20.gl compile status, which basically tells us if it's compiled or not. So we're going to say if it's equal to GL false, which is 1, or 0, it's equal to 0, then we want to print out an error message. Is this important? No, it is not. So we're going to we're going to put system.error.out print, and it's going to be error vertex shader dash and then plus gl20.gl get shader info log, and it wants which shader, which is vertex shader. So what this does, if there's an error, then it's going to say where it is, and it's going to tell us where it is in that shader. So Fragment Shader is basically the same thing as this, except for Fragment Shader. So we're just going to copy and paste, and we're just going to put Fragment Shader instead. So everywhere where it says Vertex Shader ID, replace it with a Fragment Shader. And instead of error Vertex Shader, it's error Fragment Shader. And right here, Fragment Shader. Now, this is all fine. Right here, the compile status and GL false. And we also want to change this to Fragment Shader. Instead of vertex file, it is fragment file. So now after we created our vertex shader and got everything, then we want to go down to attach it to our program. And so we're going to do gl20.gl attach shader to first argument is which program, and the second argument is which shader. And then we're going to do this again for the fragment. So attach shader program fragment. So now after we attach it, we want to link and validate the program. So what we're going to do is gl20.gl link program, which program you want, and gl20.gl validate program, and which program you want. Now, in the linking and the validating, there could be errors, like both of them have an error, but it can't be sent. So what we're going to do is we're going to basically do the same thing for here, but for linking and validating. And instead of a shader, it's a program. So let's just copy this and change it. And so instead of get shader I, it's get program I, and change fragment shader to program ID. And right there. And so error program linking. Instead of compile status, it's link status. And we're going to do the same thing for validate. So just copy that. Instead of link, it's validate. Instead of linking down here, it's validating. So now this should all be ready to go. And so we created our both shaders. We created our program. We attached the shaders to the program, and we validated and linked the program to our game. So in the bind, it's only going to have one simple function. It's going to be gl20.gl use program, and it wants which program, which is our program. Now for remove, we're going to have to do one step at a time. So we need to detach both shaders, delete those shaders, and then delete the program. So we're going to do gl20.gl detach shader. It's going to say which program you want that is needing to be detached, and which shader is needing to be detached. So we're going to do that for both. Detach shader, program ID, fragment. So then we also need to delete those shaders after we detached it. So we got to go to gl20.gl delete shader. Then we need to go to gl delete shader and vertex shader. And then we need to do the same thing for fragments. So gl delete shader and then fragment shader ID. And then after all that, we need to delete the program. So delete program and program ID. And there we go. So that's all. That's the good news, and we got it all done. So line equals reader dot. Oh, we also got to define a reader before we do that. So that could have been an error. Reader is equal to new file, new Bufferedreader, and it's going to be, so it needs a file reader. So we're going to do new file reader, and what this takes in is file, so we're just going to put file. A buffered reader. There we go. And we need to import file reader. So now this should work. So now it gets rid of that. We're going to create a new shader class, a new class called Basic Shader, which is what it is. It's going to extend shader, and extends shader, and it needs to add a constructor. And with this, instead of doing a constructor, we're just going to define it in here straight off. So we're going to do private static string, or final string, because we're never going to change this. Final string vertex file, that's going to be equal to our source, and fragment file that's also equal to our source. So instead of this, we're just going to put that. Instead of that, we're just going to put that. So now we have ourselves a basic shader, but it doesn't have any shader, or it basically doesn't have any use. So we're going to go back to the shader, and we're going to add an abstract, which this is why I put it as an abstract class. I'm going to add an abstract function called public abstract void bind all attributes. So what this does is it basically takes all the attributes from your model, and it puts it allows the shader to access them. But with this, we actually need to create another one called public void bind attribute, so we can actually bind the attribute. That's just, and it needs to take in index and a string location. So int index and string location. So then we need to do gl20.gl bind attrib location. It needs the program, which is our program, the index, which is our index, and the name, which is location. So now we need to actually write that method in here, and we need to do super.bind attribute 0 positions, which is, if you didn't notice, is what we're going to put in our shaders. So actually, I'm going to call these vertices, so it makes more sense. Vertices. So now it goes into the shader that we are going to create, and it looks for vertices, and it's going to put all of our vertices from our model in there. So now with these two classes, we can create our first shaders. So we're going to create a new file, and we're going to call it basic shader vertex shader. And the file extension, it could be a txt, it could be any file extension, but I'm just going to call it vs because that makes most sense. And I'm going to create another file, which is basically the same as the vertex shader, but it's fragment shader. So basic fragment shader, and we're going to call it fs. So if it changes to like a Visual Studio, it's probably because it's one of those file extensions. I'm not going to use Visual Studio because I don't know C or C++. So I'm just going to write fs on here for Fragment Shader. Okay, so now with our two shaders, what we're going to do is we're going to actually write some GLSL code into it. And GLSL is basically the shader code. I don't know what it means, but it probably means like graphics something, shader something. I don't know what the L means. Graphics library, shader library, I don't know. So we're just gonna write some code. So first we need to define which version this shader is. So, excuse me, we need to do hashtag version 400, which is 4.0. And we need the core version. And in here, we're going to take in a vec3 of vertices. Sound familiar? Which is what we did here, is we just bind an attribute. So now shaders can actually access this. And we're also going to put out a vec4 of color, so we can calculate color here. So now we need to create a void main, and in this void main, we need to set the position of it. We need to write GL position is equal to vec4, because position is vec4. We need to do vertices and then 1.0. And now we actually need to find color, so we can send it over to our fragment shader to color our rectangle. So we need to set color equal to vec4, and it needs to be vertices.x plus 0.5, or however you want your color. 0.5 is the lowest you can go, because if you go any lower, it might turn black. Most of the rectangle might turn black. Then we need to do either 1.0 or 0.0. If you want any green, I'm just going to do 0.0. And vertices.y plus 0.5. The reason why we're not doing z is we haven't added that component in. So why would we do that? We also need 1.0 for alpha. And that's it for our basic vertex shader. Now to our fragment shader, all we need to do is basically the same thing, version 400 and core. And it takes in the vec4 color that we took out from the vertex shader, and in void main, we set this equal to frag. It also needs to say out frag color, which is what is colors are rectangle, so frag color. And so down here we need to set frag color equal to color, because we already set color to what position it is. So now this should all be done, and we can just add that to our main class. So let's do public static basic shader. Oh yeah, we actually have to put in the file names. So for Vertex file, we have to go from, this is the base, so we have to do source slash engine slash shaders, and then our file name, which is basic vertex shader.vs. We might have to add a dot slash so it can tell if it's this. And then we're going to put that fragment file, change this to fs, and fragment shader, so we can actually access these. And I'm going to do that so you can actually see it in one go. There we go. Now let's go to this and say basic shader, and that's equal to new basic shader. And then let's do that because it has no constructor. Import that. Then we have to create it, which we'll do it right here. So shader.create. And we also need to remove it after. So shader.remove. And so every frame we need to bind it so we can color our model. So we do shader.bind. So now with this, we should have a rainbow looking rectangle here we go. We got a rainbow looking rectangle. That's why I set the green component to 0, and if you do that, fragment shader right here, we got 1.0. It will turn into like a blue, a light blue, green, and yellow one. So also, I really don't like the red in the background, so I'm going to change that back to just black. So with this, we have ourselves a multicolor rectangle, like we said we would. Anyways, this will be it for the shaders tutorial. Next tutorial, I'll be adding textures. The reason I didn't add textures for a part 3 models is because you needed shaders to do so. So I'm just going to do that next one. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and be sure to like and subscribe for more videos, and I'll see you later. Bye!